What happens when a wife thinks one special night out doesn't count as cheating? How does a husband quietly gather proof instead of fighting back? Why did the legal papers land in my hands before I could explain anything? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Vesper Aldaine, and I guess this is the part where I finally admit things didn't go the way I thought they would. People keep saying I should take accountability, but honestly, I still don't understand why everyone is acting like I destroyed my whole marriage over one night. It wasn't even planned. I didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd end up in a VIP lounge with a guy whose arms looked carved out of stone. I just wanted a little excitement before our anniversary. Something to remind me I was still noticeable. Gareth, my husband, never understood that part of me. He said stability mattered more than attention, easy for him to say with his quiet routines and his calm voice that always made me feel like the dramatic one. I wasn't trying to start anything. I wasn't trying to cheat. I was just having fun, something I used to be good at before life got dull and predictable. People keep calling what happened the moment everything fell apart. But I still think the real problem was how Gareth reacted afterward. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just went silent, like he already knew what he was going to do next. I'm not proud of the way I started that week, but I also don't think it was as dramatic as people made it sound. Our anniversary was coming up, and instead of feeling excited, I just felt bored. Not unhappy, just stuck in a routine that made me feel like time was flattening out. Every day felt the same. Wake up, work, dinner, quiet TV, Gareth rinsing his mug like he always did, and me pretending not to notice how predictable everything had become. He didn't do anything wrong. That's the part everyone keeps missing. He was steady, supportive, always on time, always prepared. And somehow those good things started feeling like chains instead of comfort. That Monday night we were in the apartment going through mail. That's how dull it had become. I tried joking about how maybe we needed to spice up our anniversary this year, maybe go to a rooftop bar like when we were younger. Gareth looked up and said he'd planned something quiet, something meaningful. I told him meaningful was code for boring. He said he just wanted a night where we remembered why we chose each other. I said we didn't need to sit in silence over overpriced wine to do that. He didn't argue. He just folded a bill, slid it into the utilities folder, and nodded like he was already tired. That nod irritated me more than anything he could have said. Later that night, while we ate leftovers, I told him I missed feeling spontaneous. He said he thought we were stable, not stuck. I laughed a little too sharply and said those two words felt the same these days. His jaw tightened for a second, but then he just reached for his water. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't ask if something was wrong. He just stayed calm, which somehow made me feel more distant from him. The next afternoon, my co-worker Tally convinced me to join her at a rooftop lounge after work. She said I needed pre-anniversary energy, whatever that meant. When I got there, the place was bright with skyline lights catching in the glass railings. Music pulsed in the background. People looked alive. I felt lighter just stepping onto the balcony. Tally teased me about my plain work outfit and tried fixing my hair, laughing that Gareth must be counting down the minutes until our celebration. I told her I wasn't even sure he remembered how to have fun anymore. She raised her eyebrows like I'd said something revealing, then shrugged and ordered us drinks. That's when I got the message from Cade. Cade wasn't a stranger. He worked security for events and sometimes helped with fitness demos at the venues I planned. Muscular in that effortless way people online write poems about. Easy smile, confident posture, the kind of guy who made the room tilt when he walked in. He'd always been flirty, but harmless flirty, light jokes about me being out of his league, comments about how I cleaned up well after long shifts. I never thought anything of it. It felt like normal admiration people give each other when life gets stale. His message said, "In the area tonight. VIP wristbands. Come say hi." I stared at it longer than I should have. Tali leaned over, saw the preview, and made a little "ooh" sound. I told her it was just Cade being friendly. She said friendly men didn't send messages like that to married women unless they wanted something. I told her she was being dramatic, but her teasing made something spark in me. A tiny, sharp thrill I hadn't felt in months. I excused myself to call Gareth. He answered on the second ring. I told him I might be late because the team was grabbing dinner. Technically, Tali and I were the entire team, but he didn't need the details. He asked if I wanted him to heat leftovers for when I came home. I told him I wasn't sure I'd be hungry. He paused, then said okay, in that steady voice that always made me feel like he was trying not to push me. I hung up feeling irritated for reasons I couldn't explain. Back at the lounge, Tali complained about the slow service, so I stepped aside to grab a better signal and replied to Cade. I kept it simple. "Where at?" He sent a pin. The club was only 4 blocks away. I told Tali I wanted to check something out, expecting her to tease me again, but she just gave me a look that could have been either concern or curiosity. She said she'd stay for one more drink and then head home. As I grabbed my things, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Cade, this one just a flexing emoji. Normally I hated emojis like that, but somehow it made me feel wanted again, visible. The walk to the club was warm and windy, the kind of night that makes people think bad choices aren't really bad, just temporary adventures. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just meeting someone, just talking, just soaking in some attention before returning to my quiet, predictable life. Inside the club, everything was louder, brighter, faster. Lights cut through the air like blades. The VIP lounge door was guarded by a tall man with a clipboard, but the moment he saw Cade wave from inside, he let me through without checking anything. That small gesture made me feel important again, like someone had noticed me, really noticed me, in a way Gareth hadn't lately. Cade stood from the sofa when I walked in, arms folded across his chest, shirt tight enough to show every line of him. He smiled like he'd been waiting specifically for me. He said something about how I looked good tonight, indirect, teasing, too smooth. I told him he always said things like that. He said he only said things that were true. I sat beside him, not close enough to be improper, but close enough that I felt the warmth from his arm. The music vibrated through the floor. The lights made everything shimmer. It was easy to forget real life outside that room. He asked about my anniversary plans, and I rolled my eyes and said Gareth wanted something quiet and responsible. Cade laughed and said I didn't seem like the quiet type. I said maybe I wasn't anymore. We talked for a while. Nothing deep, nothing meaningful, just surface-level things that felt exciting because someone was paying attention. At one point, I leaned over to look at something on his phone, and he shifted slightly so my shoulder brushed his. It wasn't planned. It wasn't innocent either. I didn't move away. My phone buzzed then, one short vibration, a text notification from Gareth. Home? I hovered over the screen but didn't answer. Instead, I locked the phone and slid it back into my bag. I told myself I'd reply later. I told myself he didn't need every detail of my night. I told myself I deserved a little freedom. And under all of that, something quieter whispered that I already knew this was the moment everything would change. I didn't plan to stay in that VIP lounge as long as I did. Honestly, I thought I'd walk in, talk to Cade for 10 minutes, feel a little flattered, and go home before Gareth even noticed. That was the story I kept telling myself anyway. But time stretched strangely in that room. The music pulsed through the glass walls, and the lights kept catching on the shine of the bottles lined up behind the bar, making everything feel unreal, like the world outside couldn't reach me. Cade leaned back on the sofa with that relaxed confidence people like him always have. He didn't ask deep questions. He didn't ask about my marriage. He didn't ask why I was really there. He kept things light, jokes about gym clients, stories from events, even a ridiculous comment about how I should try personal training because I had the posture for it. I laughed more than I should have, even when the jokes weren't funny. It wasn't about humor. It was about feeling seen. My phone buzzed again. Gareth this time asking if I was safe. I stared at the notification and felt this sudden wave of irritation. Safe. As if I was some teenager who needed supervision. As if he had any idea what it felt like to want something different, something thrilling. I slid the phone back into my bag without replying. At some point, Tally messaged me too. She wrote something like, "Still alive? Or should I send search and rescue?" I sent her a quick "I'm good" and a picture of the lounge lights. Not the people, not the sofa, just the lights. I didn't want questions. I didn't want explanations. I just wanted the night to stay soft around the edges. Cade ordered another round, and when the waiter brought it, he placed a hand on the back of the sofa behind me, close enough that I felt the heat from his arm. He didn't touch me directly. He didn't have to. The closeness filled in the rest. I kept telling myself it meant nothing. Physical space wasn't a crime. Sitting near someone wasn't betrayal. All the arguments sounded cleaner in my head than they would have if I'd said them out loud. A group of people entered the lounge, a couple of influencers I recognized from event work. One of them lifted her phone the moment she saw the room. She spun in a half circle recording a clip, caught everyone in the background, and moved on. I thought nothing of it. People recorded everything these days. I didn't realize until later how much that few seconds would cost me. Cade nudged my shoulder lightly and said something about how I looked tense. I told him I wasn't. He smiled and said I didn't need to pretend. I tried to brush it off, but he had this way of talking that made it sound like he already understood. He didn't, of course. But it felt good to pretend someone did. He told me I should act my age less and my mood more. Whatever that meant. I said maybe I was tired of feeling old. He laughed and shook his head, saying I didn't look old at all. I should have recognized that line for what it was, a cheap compliment, but after months of feeling invisible, it landed like praise. The hours slipped by without me noticing. At one point, someone brought over a tray of small desserts. I took one without thinking and got powdered sugar on my dress. Cade reached over automatically, brushed a spot from my sleeve with his thumb, then stopped himself halfway, hovering. I didn't pull away. I should have. I didn't. That tiny moment ended up bigger in my mind than anything else. Not because it was intimate, but because I didn't correct it. I let the gesture linger. I let him look at me a bit too long. Nothing happened, nothing physical, but intent has weight, even when no one touches it. My phone buzzed again, louder this time because the music dipped. It was Gareth saying he'd left the porch light on for me. The gentleness of the message made something twist in my chest. I hated that feeling. Guilt, regret, something uncomfortable. I pushed it down. I didn't want tenderness right then. I wanted to feel interesting, not cared for. I typed out a quick reply, heading home soon, but didn't hit send. I stared at the message, thumb hovering. Instead of sending it, I deleted the draft and locked my phone. Avoidance felt easier. Around midnight, the lounge thinned out. People drifted back to the dance floor. Cade stretched, rolling his shoulders in a way that made the fabric of his shirt tighten. He said he was thinking about heading out and asked if I wanted him to call me a ride. I told him I could call my own. He nodded, but there was this look, curious, maybe disappointed, maybe nothing, that made me feel strangely bold. Instead of leaving right away, I stayed for a few more minutes after he walked off. I needed the room to settle back into something normal before stepping out. The music from the main floor felt louder now, like the night was reminding me I still had to return to real life. I finally grabbed my bag and headed for the exit. As I reached the stairwell, a couple stepped aside to let me pass. The woman glanced at me, then at her phone, and whispered something to her friend. I didn't think anything of it. People whispered all the time. Outside, The air felt cooler, cleaner. I took a long breath and told myself the night was harmless. Just a lounge, just a conversation, just a few hours away from the dull routine waiting at home. Nothing happened. I kept repeating that as I ordered a rideshare. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. It almost sounded true. The ride home was quiet. Streetlights flickered across the window, and my guilt sat somewhere beneath my ribs, shifting every time the driver made a turn. When the car pulled up to our place, I hesitated before opening the door. For a brief second, I wondered if Gareth was awake, if he'd ask questions, if I'd have the energy to lie. But the living room lights were off when I stepped inside. His shoes were by the door in their usual place, lined neatly like always. The faint smell of his aftershave lingered in the air, comforting and accusing at the same time. In the kitchen, there were 2 mugs on the counter, his rinsed and placed upside down, mine left from the morning. Something about the sight made me feel small, like he'd stayed up just long enough to wait for me and then given up. I went to the bedroom. Gareth was asleep on his side of the bed, or pretending to be. I whispered a quiet, "Hey," but he didn't answer. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that, listening to the sound of his steady breathing. Eventually, I told myself I'd explain everything in the morning. I'd make it sound harmless. I'd make it sound like nothing. And maybe, if I said it enough, he'd believe it. Or I would. The morning after the lounge felt strangely bright, like the sun was trying too hard. I woke up with that dry, tight feeling behind my eyes, the kind you get when you've stayed up too late pretending everything is fine. Gareth was already gone. His side of the bed was perfectly smooth, his pillow propped like he'd never touched it. He always made the bed neatly when he left early, but that morning it felt deliberate, almost pointed. I told myself I was imagining it. In the kitchen, I found a fresh mug beside mine on the counter, his rinsed and upside down, mine still with a faint ring of coffee at the bottom. Something about the pairing made my chest pinch, but I ignored it. I told myself he'd probably just left early for work. No big deal. I made toast I didn't want and left it half-eaten as I hurried out the door. At the office, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual. People were already at their desks, typing, sipping coffee, pretending they didn't notice me walk in 10 minutes late. Normally no one cared, but there were glances, quick ones people usually hide better. I pretended not to see. Tali rolled over in her chair, spinning it with her foot. She looked at me like she wanted to ask something, but wasn't sure how. She finally whispered, "Fun night?" with this half-smile that tried to sound playful, but didn't land right. I shrugged and said it was fine. She asked if Gareth was mad, and I told her he didn't say anything. That part was true, but the truth felt heavier when spoken. She nodded slowly, like she had assumed that answer, then rolled back to her desk without joking again. Around 10, I got another buzz on my phone. A message from our friend Lila. "Hey, everything okay?" I replied with a simple, "Why?" A moment later, she sent a link, an Instagram story from the influencer I'd noticed last night. The clip was short, lights flashing, drinks clinking, people lounging on the sofa. And near the corner of the frame, easy to miss unless you knew who to look for, was me sitting close to Cade, shoulders angled toward him. Not touching, not doing anything wrong, but close. Closer than married women were supposed to be. My stomach dropped even as I drafted a casual reply. "Oh, that. Totally harmless." I added a smiley face to make it look light. Lila didn't respond. I closed the notification and dropped my phone into my drawer, slamming it shut harder than I meant to. The sound drew a look from Megan, 2 desks over. I told her it was nothing, just a drawer sticking. She nodded slowly and kept typing. Minutes later, Gareth texted, "Can we talk later? Riverside?" The message felt too calm, too neutral. I didn't know how to read it. I typed sure, but didn't hit send right away. I stared at the half-written word until the cursor felt like it was blinking in accusation. Finally, I pressed send and sat back, breathing shallowly. I tried to focus on work. Emails blurred together. Numbers didn't register. Tally asked me a question about a vendor contract, but I couldn't process the words. I gave her an answer that probably didn't make sense because she blinked twice and said, "Okay," in that slow, careful tone people use with unstable animals. At lunch, I stepped outside into the chilly air, hoping the walk around the block would clear my head. Instead, my thoughts kept circling the same loop. The clip, the angle, the way people looked at me, the way Gareth wrote, "We need to talk." He never used that phrase. Ever. He always softened things. But not today. I told myself I wasn't scared. I told myself he'd be reasonable. I told myself he'd understand once I explained that it looked worse than it was. I kept repeating the story until it almost sounded true. The riverside path was quiet when I got there after work. The water moved slowly, the surface catching bits of the setting sun. Gareth was already leaning against the railing, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense but still. He looked like he'd been waiting a while. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He didn't frown either. His expression was unreadable, like he'd set aside emotion and replaced it with something steady and empty. I hadn't seen that look before. I walked up and said I didn't know what people were saying online, but that everything had gotten blown out of proportion. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He just watched me with that same stillness that made my stomach flip. I told him I was at the lounge for work connections, which wasn't exactly true, but not exactly false either. He asked softly if that was the only reason. I said I needed to unwind. He nodded like he had expected that. Then he said he saw the clip. His voice didn't strain, didn't rise. Just calm, level words that made my pulse spike. I told him the angle was bad, that it made things look closer than they were. I said I never touched anyone. He nodded again, not disagreeing, not agreeing, just absorbing. For a moment, the silence between us felt thick enough to choke on. He finally said, "Okay," and pushed away from the railing. Not angry, not relieved, just done with the moment. He told me he had errands to run and that he'd see me at home. I asked if that was it. He said there was nothing else to discuss right now. His tone wasn't cold. It was distant, as if he'd stepped several feet back emotionally and didn't plan to return. He walked toward the street without looking back. I watched him lift his phone, glance at it, and delete something off the screen before slipping it back into his pocket. The gesture was small, but it didn't feel small. It felt like a message I couldn't understand yet. I stayed by the river for a few minutes after he left. The wind picked up, cutting through my jacket, and I suddenly felt exposed in a way I hadn't earlier, not because of the video, but because of the quiet in his voice. I wanted him to yell, to argue, to call me out, anything but that calmness. When I got home later, the apartment was neat, too neat, shoes aligned, papers stacked. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something like printer toner. Gareth was in the kitchen going through a drawer, sorting receipts into 2 small stacks. He didn't look at me when I walked in. I told him dinner was easy if he wanted something. He said he wasn't hungry. I asked if he wanted to talk now instead of later. He said he needed to finish what he was doing. His calm was starting to feel like a shell I couldn't break through. I leaned on the counter, waiting for him to reach for me or say something reassuring. Instead, he simply put 1 stack of receipts into a small folder and labeled it with neat handwriting. I joked weakly that he was turning into an accountant. He said he was just organizing things. He didn't smile. He didn't even pretend to. Later that night, when he went to bed early, I stayed up scrolling through the clip again, replaying it in my mind and trying to see what he saw. Each time, something in my chest tightened. It wasn't guilt, not exactly, more like irritation that a moment so small could ripple out so far. I finally turned off my phone and stood in the dark kitchen. On the fridge, a new calendar reminder was written in Gareth's handwriting. Downtown, 10:40 a.m. No notes, no explanation. I stared at it a long time, telling myself it was nothing. But the longer I looked, the less I believed myself. Dinner with both families was supposed to smooth things over. At least that's what I told myself when I suggested it. I imagined a warm table, soft chatter, maybe even Gareth relaxing enough to see I wasn't the villain everyone kept hinting I was. Instead, the restaurant felt too bright, too clean, too ready to show every flaw. The long table was set near a window, and the light hit everyone's faces in a way that made every expression clear, too clear. Gareth sat at the far end beside his sister Rhea, posture steady, hands folded. My mother Mira sat next to me, already whispering something about how people needed to loosen their grip on tradition. She always said things like that when she thought I needed defending. I didn't mind. It made me feel like at least one person understood me. When the menus arrived, I tried to start conversation by talking about the anniversary coming up. I said something like, "We might actually do something fun this year," and Mira laughed too loudly. Rhea glanced at Gareth, then at me, her eyes sharp in that way only sisters can manage. She asked softly what I meant by fun. The way she said the word made it sound dangerous. I told her not to worry, that Gareth and I were fine, that people online always exaggerated things. My mother nodded beside me like that settled it. Jonah, my brother, looked down at his glass, avoiding my eyes. He had barely spoken since sitting down. The food took longer than usual, and in the waiting silence, I started to feel trapped. I hated silence in groups. It always felt like everyone was quietly choosing their sides. So I tried to lighten the mood. I made a small joke about how Gareth had always been the responsible one, and how he sometimes overreacted about harmless things. My mother chuckled, but no one else did. Gareth didn't even blink. Not anger, not amusement, just stillness. Rhea leaned slightly forward and said she didn't think what happened online looked harmless. Her voice wasn't raised, but every word felt like a tap on a bruise. I told her people shouldn't jump to conclusions. She said conclusions usually came from evidence. Gareth didn't stop her. That bothered me. I tried to smile and brush the comment away, saying people on the internet loved drama, and that our marriage was none of their business. My mother nodded again, like she was keeping score in my favor, but Jonah looked at me with this tired expression and asked if I had considered how it made Gareth feel. I told him I wasn't going to be responsible for other people's insecurities. That was the first moment the table went completely silent. Even the waiter hesitated before stepping in to refill water glasses. When the food finally arrived, people focused on their plates more than on each other. I tried again to start conversation, but every topic felt wrong. Gareth barely responded. He wasn't cold, not rude, just distant in a way that made me feel like I was invisible in his line of sight. Halfway through the meal, my mother leaned toward me and whispered that Gareth needed to learn not to take every little thing personally, loud enough for Rhea to hear. Rhea set her fork down and asked Mira to clarify. Mira said simply that strong couples didn't panic over attention from others. Rhea responded that strong couples didn't seek it. Another silence fell, heavier than the first. I felt irritation rise in my throat. I was tired of people acting like I had committed a crime, tired of acting guilty for something that wasn't even real. I told Rhea she was blowing things out of proportion, that nothing happened. She said she never mentioned happened. She only said attention. Gareth still didn't say a word. Near the end of dinner, I decided to take control of the narrative. I said, loudly enough, that couples sometimes just misunderstood each other, that Gareth had been quiet lately, and that I couldn't be blamed for wanting connection. The comment hung between us like a dropped glass. Rhea shook her head. Jonah sighed. My mother repeated that I shouldn't apologize for being vibrant. I felt validated for a second. until I saw the subtle way Gareth's jaw moved, like he was holding something back. When the check came, Gareth took it without being asked. He looked at it for a moment, then placed his card down. Not politely, not angrily, just with this mechanical precision that made me feel excluded from whatever he was thinking. As we walked out, Jonah stopped me near the door. He asked quietly if I was trying to sabotage my own life. I told him not to be dramatic, but his face didn't change. He said he loved me, but I needed to be honest with myself. I told him Gareth needed to meet me halfway. Jonah didn't answer, just walked to his car. Gareth didn't wait for me outside. He was already heading toward his vehicle, his steps steady, not rushed. I hurried after him, trying to catch up. When I reached him, he opened the passenger door, but didn't look at me. I climbed in, feeling the distance between us like a cold draft. The drive home was quiet, not tense, just empty. At home, Gareth went straight to the bedroom and changed out of his clothes without speaking. I followed him, trying to break the silence by talking about work, about plans, about anything normal. He didn't respond. He wasn't ignoring me. He just wasn't engaging, like the connection between us had been unplugged. He walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer I rarely paid attention to, and pulled out a few small items: extra keys, a receipt stack, 2 envelopes. He placed them neatly on the counter, not muttering, not sighing, just moving slowly, deliberately. I asked what he was doing. He said he was sorting things. I asked what that meant. He said nothing. I tried to joke that he was becoming organized all of a sudden. He didn't smile. Instead, he took a sticky note from the drawer, wrote something quickly, and placed it beside the envelopes. The note read, "Bring forms." I laughed, confused, and asked what forms he meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he slipped the note into one of the envelopes and placed the envelope into a different drawer. A drawer I had never seen him lock before, but this time he did. The soft click echoed through the kitchen. A knot formed in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling aside. It was probably nothing. Probably just work papers. Probably just him being thorough. He went to the guest room after that, not slamming the door, not making a scene, just walking in with the same calm that made me feel strangely unsteady. I wandered through the apartment for a while, picking up things that didn't need picking up, pretending the room didn't feel unfamiliar. Eventually, I walked back to the kitchen to turn off the lights. As I reached for the switch, I saw something on the counter I hadn't noticed earlier, an empty space where a stack of mail used to be, and the faint smell of printer toner drifting through the air. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at that locked drawer, telling myself I wasn't losing control of anything. I told myself Gareth would come around. I told myself the night was still fixable. I told myself a lot of things. None of them felt true. The community centre smelled faintly of dust and old carpet, the kind of place where people held Sunday classes or neighbourhood meetings. I didn't want to be there, but Gareth had reminded me earlier that we'd promised Tom and Lila we'd drop by their planning session for the charity drive. I thought skipping it would make things worse, so I told myself going was the responsible move. Acting normal would make everything normal again. When we arrived, Gareth walked ahead of me, not rude, just separate. People greeted him first, which annoyed me, even though I didn't want to admit it. He always carried himself like he had nothing to prove. I kept waiting for him to glance back at me, hand me a smile, give me something to hold on to. Nothing. Tom waved us over to a table covered in flyers and donation sheets. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Maybe parenthood, maybe stress, maybe the fact that almost everyone in our circle had seen the lounge clip by now. I pretended not to see the way his eyes flicked between Gareth and me, like he was bracing for something. We sat through the meeting, though I barely heard a word. Gareth kept taking notes on his phone, typing quietly, not showing me the screen. Every time I shifted to peek, he angled the phone slightly away. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. He had never liked keeping secrets. Now he seemed built out of them. At one point, Lila leaned in and whispered that things would calm down soon. I asked what she meant. She hesitated before saying she hoped Gareth and I were talking it out. I laughed too quickly and said Gareth was being dramatic and silent, like he always did when overwhelmed. Her face tightened in a way I wasn't used to from her. After the meeting, Tom pulled me aside while Gareth spoke with 2 volunteers. Tom's voice was low but steady. He said he cared about both of us, and he didn't want to see things fall apart. I told him nothing was falling apart. He said Gareth looked like he had already stepped back from something. I felt a flare of anger at the phrasing, stepped back, like I had pushed him. I told Tom he didn't understand the situation. He said maybe not, but he did understand consequences. I snapped that people shouldn't act like I'd done something unforgivable. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said he hoped I'd be honest with myself before it was too late. The way he said it made my skin prickle. Gareth walked over then, calm as always, asking if I was ready to go. I wanted him to ask what we'd been talking about. I wanted him to care. He didn't ask. He just waited. The drive home moved in silence again. Streetlights flicked across his face, making him look both familiar and unreachable. I kept glancing at him, trying to read something in his expression. Nothing. Just measured calm. When we got home, he went to the kitchen and started lining up receipts and notes, organizing them like he had the night before. I tried to ignore it, but the more he worked quietly, the more agitated I felt. I finally asked what he was doing. He said, without looking up, that he was preparing things. Preparing for what? I asked. He didn't answer. My voice sharpened. I said it felt like he was punishing me. He said calmly that he wasn't punishing anyone. He was handling things. I demanded he explain what that meant. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show frustration. He simply said he didn't think explanations helped anymore. That hurt in a way shouting never could have. I told him he was being cryptic on purpose, making me feel like the bad guy. He said I didn't need help feeling that way. That comment lit something sharp inside me. I stepped in front of him, blocking his way, as he moved to put papers in the guest room. I asked him to stop being distant. I told him we needed to fix our anniversary before it got ruined. He paused, looking at me in a way I couldn't decode. Not angry, not sad, just resolved. He said quietly that he had tried to talk in the last few days, but I'd been busy explaining instead of listening. I felt defensive immediately. I said I didn't need to listen to accusations based on one clip. He said it wasn't about the clip alone. It was about patterns, about things I didn't want to acknowledge. I told him he was exaggerating. He said he wasn't. When he stepped around me, I followed him into the hallway, asking why he was acting like a stranger. He didn't turn around. He just said he was tired of feeling like a prop in his own life. That made no sense to me. I told him if anyone felt like a prop, it was me, always trying to make our life more interesting. He stopped then, just briefly, hand resting on the guest room door frame. I thought he might finally open up. Instead, he said, in a voice almost too calm, that he wasn't going to argue anymore. He had made a decision. My stomach tightened, but I pushed it down. I told him decisions required discussion. He shook his head. He said some decisions were just choices made when talking didn't work. I tried to laugh it off. I said he was being dramatic. He said he wasn't. He said he would not escalate. He would not shout, and he would not fight. He would handle everything properly. The finality of the word properly chilled me. It felt too official, too prepared, too final. I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. He stepped into the guest room, and before closing the door, he said we would talk soon. But in the right way. The door clicked softly. I stood in the hallway, breathing hard, unsure how we'd gotten here. Everything felt crooked, like the floor was tilting beneath me. I told myself he was bluffing. He always calmed down eventually. He always listened to me once I explained things clearly. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket and stepped onto the balcony. The night felt colder than it should have. Below, cars rolled past in steady lines, all those people going somewhere, unaware of how off-balance my world felt. When I came back inside, Gareth's laptop screen glowed from the kitchen counter. A soft notification blinked at the top right corner. File uploaded successfully. I moved closer, but the screen dimmed before I could read anything else. I was tempted to shake him awake and demand he tell me exactly what he was planning. But some small, stubborn part of me kept insisting he was overreacting, that he would come around, that nothing was truly wrong. I told myself his calm was temporary. I told myself he loved me too much to stay distant. I told myself tomorrow would fix everything, but standing there in the dim kitchen light, listening to the faint hum of the fridge, all those thoughts felt like lies I was repeating just to drown out the truth forming quietly around me. The office tower lobby was colder than I expected, all stone floors and tall windows that made every sound echo. I had barely slept, and the coffee I grabbed on the way in did nothing to settle the knot in my stomach. Gareth hadn't come home the night before. He hadn't texted, he hadn't called, he hadn't even left one of his little notes on the counter. The silence felt heavier than anger ever could. I told myself he was at work, keeping busy, needing space. That was normal. People needed space. But when I checked the staff directory for his schedule and saw he was supposed to be in this building for a vendor meeting, something in me twisted. I needed answers. I needed him to stop acting calm and distant. Calm was worse than yelling. Calm meant decisions. I spotted him near the security desk, talking quietly to a man in a navy jacket. Gareth looked composed, dressed neatly, expression unreadable. When he saw me approaching, he gave a small nod, nothing warm, nothing cold, just acknowledgement. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't keep ignoring me." He said he wasn't ignoring me. He was handling things. The way he said it made my chest tighten. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. He only said we should keep our voices down. That irritated me instantly. I stepped closer. "Why are you acting like this? I said the lounge was nothing. You're making it bigger than it is. You're leaving me hanging, Gareth." People nearby shifted their attention toward us. A woman waiting for the elevator pretended to look at her phone while clearly listening. 2 interns slowed their steps. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't stop. I needed him to react. I needed him to look upset so I could call it an overreaction. Instead, he stayed calm. "You don't get to play the victim here," I whispered harshly. "You're the one walking around acting like I committed a crime. I didn't cheat. I didn't do anything real. You're punishing me for being interesting. You always hated when people noticed me." A flicker passed across his face, hurt maybe, but it disappeared quickly. He took a breath, steady and controlled, and said, "This isn't a punishment." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "You disappear for a night, you lock drawers, you won't tell me anything, and now you're here acting like a stranger. If you wanted to fix things, you'd talk to me. You'd try. That's what couples do." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes tired in a way I had never seen before. Not angry, just done, completely done. "I did try," he said softly. "You didn't want to hear it." Before I could reply, a man in a grey suit approached us. He held a folder against his chest and asked in a formal tone, "Excuse me, are you Vesper Aldaine?" I frowned, confused. "Yes?" He handed me the folder. "You've been served." For a moment, everything felt muffled, like the building swallowed every sound except my heartbeat. I stared at the folder, not wanting to touch it even though it was already in my hands. My mouth went dry. "What is this?" I asked, voice thin. Gareth answered quietly. "It's the proper way." My fingers shook as I opened the top page. The first line hit me like a slap. Petition for dissolution of marriage, followed by temporary financial and possession orders. No accusations, no dramatic language. Just clean formal structure, legal, final, real. "You're divorcing me." My voice cracked louder than I wanted it to. People nearby pretended not to stare, but definitely were. Gareth didn't step closer. He didn't soften. He didn't look away either. "I'm ending something that already ended itself. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to fight. I'm doing this the right way." I shook my head. "Over a video? Over one stupid night?" "It wasn't one night," he said. "It was everything you kept calling nothing." The lobby felt too bright, too open. I tried to step toward him, but he shifted slightly back, not dramatically, just enough to make the distance final. "You're really doing this here," I whispered. "In public?" He nodded once. "You preferred public moments. I'm giving you one you can't spin." My throat closed. I wanted to say something sharp, something clever, something that would make him hesitate. Nothing came out. All the lines I used to protect myself, "It wasn't real, you're overreacting, you're insecure," felt suddenly small and useless. He lifted his bag, adjusted the strap, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Take care of yourself, Vesper." Then he turned and walked toward the glass doors. I watched him leave, unable to move, the papers trembling in my hands, the legal stamp catching the lobby light like a spotlight I couldn't escape.